The estate lawyer cleared his throat and announced that my father's previous will had been voided, replaced by a new document presented by my Aunt Carol. This new will, he read, left the entire multi-million-dollar estate not to me, his only daughter, but to Carol, for her years of devout and selfless care. I felt Carol's sharp, predatory gaze on me from across the polished table. Her own lawyer, an accomplice I didn't recognize sitting beside her like a vulture. They were both waiting, practically vibrating with the expectation of my tears. My screams, the messy, hysterical breakdown of a grieving daughter. I did not cry. My hands, resting in my lap, were perfectly still. I simply looked up, met the lawyer's neutral gaze, and gave a small, thoughtful nod. What, my aunt, in her arrogant performance of piety, had failed to understand was that I was not a victim in this scene. I was an observer, and she had just handed me the first concrete piece of evidence I needed for her complete and total destruction. The phrase devout and selfless care echoed in the silent, wood-paneled room. I thought of the last 6 months, a blur of antiseptic smells and profound exhaustion. I had moved back into my childhood home, taking a full, unpaid leave of absence from my teaching job. This wasn't just a simple break. I had sacrificed my position in the tenure queue, an academic milestone I had spent a decade building, a dream my father had been so proud of. I was the one who held my father's hand through the night terrors. I was the one who learned to change his IV bags, my hands shaking the first time, but steady by the end. I was the one who measured his medications, who bathed him, who fed him spoonfuls of broth, and who slept on a cot at the foot of his bed for 112 consecutive nights. And where was Carol? She would arrive once a week, always on a Sunday afternoon, dressed in her finest church clothes, smelling of expensive perfume that made my father cough. She would refuse to touch him, citing his illness and her own delicate constitution. Instead, she would loudly pray over him for exactly 10 minutes, her voice a theatrical boom in the quiet sickness of the room. "Clara, dear, you look exhausted," she would say, her voice dripping with a thick, false sympathy. "You must let me help. I'll handle all the big picture things. The finances, the estate papers. You just focus on, well, the unpleasantness." While I was literally cleaning my father's sick body, grateful that my useless teacher's salary was at least enough to cover the expensive prescriptions his insurance refused to pay, Carol was helping. She was using the access I'd granted her to meet with his financial manager. She was organizing his office, and as I later discovered, helping him by bringing in her own lawyer just to look things over. She didn't just want the money, she wanted the credit. She wanted to erase my sacrifice and wear it as her own. She had metabolized my exhaustion into her inheritance. And for that, there would be no mercy. My mind flashed to the week before, in the quiet, sad aftermath of the funeral. When Carol had begun her cleanup of my father's house, I had come into his study, a room that still smelled of his pipe, tobacco, and old books, to find his old leaven, cracked leather family Bible, my grandmother's Bible, the one he'd held to his chest in his last lucid moments, sitting on top of a pile of trash bags, destined for the dump. It was piled with old magazines and stained tablecloths. To Carol, it was just junk. "Clara, you must be practical," she'd chided me, waving a dismissive hand at his bookshelves, her bracelets clinking. "These old things are just full of dust and sad memories. We need a clean slate. Your father would want us to be efficient." While I was rescuing that Bible, my hands shaking with rage at the sheer disrespect for the one object that held our entire family history, Carol was efficiently in the next room, on the phone with an auction house, loudly appraising my father's art collection. She was already measuring the windows for new drapes, discussing how she would brighten up the dreadful study. She thought I was the sentimental, weak one, clinging to junk. She had no idea that I wasn't saving it for sentiment. I was saving it as leverage. I knew my father, and I knew he trusted paper, and God far more than he ever trusted his sister. She, in her arrogance. I thought the asset was the house. I knew the true asset was the history she was too greedy to read. The estate lawyer, Mr. Harrison, my father's actual, neutral lawyer, who looked profoundly uncomfortable, addressed me with professional pity. Ms. Hayes. Clara, this is, I know, a profound shock. A shock. No, this was a confirmation. I remembered the night of the stroke. The real one. The one that ultimately took him. I had been awake for 72 hours straight. My vision tunneling. My world reduced to the beep of the heart monitor. Carol had called my phone exactly once during that entire vigil. The doctors say it's the end. I had whispered into the phone, my voice raw and cracking. Carol, please come. He's asking for you. He just said your name. There was a long, cold pause on the other end of the line. Clara, I just can't, she finally said, her voice sharp and irritated. Not sad. It's my prayer group night. I will pray for his soul from afar. You're stronger than me. Dear, you handle it. While I was holding my father's hand as he took his last rattling breath. Alone in a sterile white room at 3 a.m. Carol was praying, but I later learned she wasn't at a prayer group. A sympathetic nurse, who had seen my aunt's behavior for weeks, told me she saw Carol leaving the hospital hours earlier, looking like she was headed to a party. She was at a late-night dinner meeting, clinking glasses with her lawyer and a friend who was a notary, finalizing the very document that now sat on this table. She was using my moment of absolute, world-ending devastation as her alibi. She didn't just steal his money. She stole his death. She used my grief as a smokescreen for her greed. She expected a grieving daughter to be sitting here today. She was about to meet a prosecutor. If there are no objections, Mr. Harrison asked, his pen hovering, ready to file the fraudulent will and begin probate. Carol smirked, a small, triumphant tightening of her lips. She looked directly at me. She has no objections. Clara is a simple person, a teacher. She doesn't understand these complex legal matters. She had always dismissed my career. My life. Such a shame you didn't go into law. Like your father, she'd say at every holiday, patting my hand. But then again, teaching is safe. For someone like you. She had used my simplicity against me for years. Clara, just let me handle the bills. Dear, you're not good with numbers. Clara, I'll talk to the doctors. You'll just get emotional. While she was labeling me as simple and emotional, I was doing what a simple teacher does. I was keeping records. I was an archivist. I had a detailed spreadsheet. I had cross-referenced my father's pharmacy logs with his bank statements. I had kept a meticulous daily journal of his lucidity and his moments of confusion, complete with timestamps. I had photocopied every single document the hospital and hospice nurses gave me. She thought she was fighting a weak teacher. She didn't realize she was fighting an obsessive researcher who had already built the entire case against her. Clara, Mr. Harrison repeated, his voice gentle. Carol's smile widened. This was it, the moment of her total victory. I felt the full weight of her contempt. The years of being called slow, sentimental, and unequipped to manage my father's legacy. I looked up, breaking my silence. My voice was ice. I have no objections. Mr. Harrison, just one clarifying question for the record. Carol's smirk faltered. Her lawyer sat up straighter. This wasn't in their script. The date on that signature page. I said, my voice unnervingly polite. I saw it, but my eyes are a bit blurry from, well, everything. Could you read the full date aloud one more time? Please, for my notes. Mr. Harrison, a man of rules, looked confused but complied. He flipped to the last page. The date of signature is October 15th. I nodded slowly, holding Carol's gaze. October 15th. I repeated, letting the words hang in the heavy air. Thank you. That's exactly what I needed to hear. Carol's face went white. Her own lawyer's eyes darted to her, his expression turning sour. The victory drained from her face. She had expected hysteria. But I had just given her analysis. She hadn't won. She had just confirmed the date of her own felony. She knew, in that single, terrible instant, that I knew, and she knew that I knew, she knew. The mask of the grieving sister was gone, replaced by the cold, hard calculation of a cornered animal. This was just the beginning. The escalation was immediate. The very next morning, a large white moving truck blocked the driveway, its engine rumbling. A blatant show of force. My Aunt Carol stepped out of a black sedan, not in funeral attire, but in a sharp, navy blue pantsuit, looking like a real estate agent ready to close a sale. Beside her was the same oily lawyer from the day before, a man whose name I still didn't know, carrying a leather briefcase. He looked nervous, his eyes avoiding mine, a clear sign that he knew exactly what that October 15th date meant. Carol, however, had doubled down on her arrogance. She had been humiliated logically, so now she was resorting to brute force. "Clara, dear," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I'm so sorry it has to be this way. But as the executrix, I have a fiduciary duty. The house must be vacated and prepared for sale." She handed me a crisp, official-looking document. "An eviction notice. You have 24 hours to remove your personal effects." I looked at the paper. 24 hours. My entire life. My father's entire life. Reduced to personal effects. I thought of the sacrifice I had made. The career I had put on hold. The fact that this was my home. The only one I had ever known. I had given up my apartment in the city. My financial independence. All to be here for him. And now, this woman, who had done nothing but circle like a vulture, was evicting me with a document based on a blatant probablement. She was treating me like a squatter. "Don't make this unpleasant, Clara," she said, loud enough for the neighbors, who were beginning to peek through their curtains. "This is all just legal. We're just following what your father wanted." While I was still numb with grief, my eyes puffy from crying, she was focused on appearances and legal bullying, turning my personal tragedy into a public spectacle. She didn't just want the house, she wanted to humiliate me, to throw me out onto the street, proving to the world that I was, as she'd always said, unequipped and simple. She expected me to crumble, to beg for more time, to burst into tears. She saw me as weak. She had no idea that while she was hiring movers, I had been making copies. "My personal effects," I repeated, my voice hollow. Two men from the moving truck, looking awkward, began to walk toward the front door. "Carol, I wouldn't do that," I said, my voice quiet. Yet it stopped them in their tracks. Carol laughed. A short, ugly bark. "Oh, Clara, don't be dramatic. You can't stop this. The will is filed. It's ironclad. It's done." She pointed a manicured finger at my father's study. "You can start by clearing out all that junk in your father's office. All those dusty books and old papers. They're worthless. Worthless." I thought of the nights I'd spent in that office, after my father was asleep, when I was too wired on adrenaline and grief to rest. I wasn't just watching TV. I was organizing. I was reading his journals. I was sorting through the mountain of medical paperwork, insurance forms, hospice reports, pharmacy receipts, doctor's notes. While Carol was plotting to steal his assets, I was meticulously archiving his suffering. She saw those papers as junk, as unpleasantness beneath her. She was too arrogant, too focused on the prize, to ever read the fine print. She had no idea that worthless junk was about to become her undoing. She thought the will was the weapon. She was wrong. The calendar was the weapon. The record was the weapon. I remembered the day that ironclad will was supposedly signed. October 15th. I didn't need to check my notes. The date was seared into my memory. That was the day of the final. Massive stroke. That was the day he had collapsed in the hallway. The day I had performed CPR while waiting for the ambulance. It was the darkest day of my life. I remembered the neurosurgeon, a kind woman with tired eyes, speaking to me in the hallway of the intensive care unit. "He's stable," she'd said. "But to protect his brain, we have to place him in a medically induced coma. He will be completely unconscious for at least 48 hours. While I was sitting by his bed, watching a machine breathe for him, my world shattered into a million pieces. Carol was where she was. Apparently, getting a signature from a man who couldn't even blink. She hadn't just forged a will. She had used the most traumatic day of my life as the date for her crime. Convinced I would be too emotional to remember the timeline, she had weaponized my grief against me, and that was her fatal, stupid mistake. "You're right, Carol," I said, my voice suddenly clear and strong. "It is a legal matter." Carol's smug expression faltered. I ignored her. I walked directly past her, past the movers, and stood in front of her lawyer, the nervous accomplice. He flinched, physically recoiling as I approached. I was holding a single brefact, folded piece of paper. I didn't hand it to Carol. I handed it directly to him. "She's right," I said to him, my voice cold and professional. "We should follow the law. You'll want to see this." As an officer of the court, he, unlike Carol, was bound by professional ethics. He couldn't refuse to look. He slowly unfolded the paper, his hands visibly shaking. Carol, impatient, snapped, "What is it? What is that junk?" It wasn't junk. It was a photocopy. It was the official hospital admission record for Arthur Hayes, dated October 15th. And right there, on the third line, were the words "patient placed in medically induced coma at 11:03 a.m. I had also included the surgeon's sworn affidavit, which I had retrieved just that morning. The lawyer's face turned the color of ash. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror. He wasn't just a witness to a crime anymore. He was an accessory. He was the one who had filed a document that was not just fraudulent, but impossibly fraudulent. He had just submitted proof of a felony to the probate court. "Clara, what is this nonsense?" Carol demanded, snatching the paper from his limp hand. She read it. Once, twice, the color drained from her face, leaving only her garish makeup. This is a lie. This is a forgery," she shrieked. The mask of the devout, grieving, sister vaporizing. You bitch. You forged this." "That," I said, pointing to the paper, "is a certified medical record, filed with the state. What you filed," and I pointed to the eviction notice, "is a fantasy. And what you did," my voice dropped, "is a felony." The lawyer, in a panic, grabbed Carol's arm. "Carol, we are leaving. Now." He was already calculating his defense, his disbarment, his future. "Call off your men," I said to him, not to her. He didn't hesitate. "You heard her. Back in the truck. We're done here." The movers, who had been watching this entire exchange with wide eyes, practically ran back to their vehicle. Carol was frozen, her face a mask of apoplectic rage. She had come here for a public victory, to see me thrown onto the curb. Instead, I had just handed her own lawyer the noose, and he was tightening it around her neck. "This isn't over," she hissed, her voice a low growl. "Oh, I know," I said, allowing myself a small, cold smile. "We haven't even gotten to the good part yet." She had lost the logic battle. She had lost the battle of force. Now, I knew exactly what she would do next. She would try to destroy my name. The logical countermove, the only one she had left, was to pivot from law to libel. Having failed to defeat me with fraudulent documents and brute force, Carol now had to destroy my credibility. If she could paint me as an unhinged, greedy, and unstable daughter. Any evidence I presented, like a hospital record proving a coma, could be dismissed as the desperate forgery of a woman consumed by grief. Her attack was, in its own way, brilliant. She didn't just spread rumors, she staged an event. She organized a memorial luncheon at my father's old church, the one he and I had attended my entire life. The one Carol herself had abandoned 15 years ago for a wealthier, modern megachurch across town. She invited the entire elderly congregation, all the people who had watched me grow up. She was weaponizing my past, my community, against me. She called me the night before, her voice thick with that sickening, false sympathy. "Clara, dear," she cooed. "I know we got off on the wrong foot. I was just so emotional. I'm hosting a small lunch tomorrow at your father's old church, just to honor him with his lifelong friends. It would mean so much if you came." I knew, instantly, that it was a trap. This was the woman who had always called my father's church that drafty old barn and mocked the congregation as a bunch of sentimental old fools. While I stood in my father's study, holding the phone, my eyes fell on the very Bible I had rescued from her trash pile. I knew she was planning something vile, using the church as her stage and the congregation as her jury. While I was analyzing her transparent lie, she was already on the phone with the church prayer circle, poisoning the well. "We must pray for poor Clara," she was telling them. "She's not well. She's saying terrible things. She's trying to contest the will. She's even forging medical documents. I'm so worried for her soul. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to see me excommunicated. She thought I was too simple to see the ambush. She didn't realize she had just invited me to her own execution." I walked into the church fellowship hall the next day, and the effect was immediate. The room, buzzing with the low chatter of the elderly congregation, went absolutely silent. It was as if I were a ghost. Mrs. Gable, the woman who had taught my Sunday school class for a decade, who had hugged me tightly at the funeral just days before, suddenly found the floor fascinating, refusing to meet my eyes. Others just stared, their faces a mixture of pity and judgment. I was completely, totally isolated. This was my community, the people who had given me casseroles and comfort, and Carol had turned them all against me in less than 24 hours. My sacrifice of a career, my months of sleepless care, none of it mattered. In their eyes, I was now the unhinged daughter, the greedy child spitting on her father's grave. Carol, of course, was at the front of the room, by the pulpit, dressed in a modest black dress, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. The perfect portrait of a grieving, devout sister. She was soaking in the sympathy she had manufactured by murdering my reputation. She had made herself the victim, and me the villain, and I hadn't even said a word. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Carol stood up. She tapped a spoon against a glass. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice trembling artfully. "It has been so hard." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "As you know, my beloved brother Arthur left me in charge of his estate." She glanced at me, her eyes full of performative pity. "It's a heavy burden, but one I must bear. The hardest part, her voice cracked, is dealing with my poor, sweet Nitsa, Clara." Every eye in the room turned to me. I sat alone at my table, perfectly still. Grief does terrible things to a person. Carol continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She's not well. She is contesting my brother's final, sacred wish. She has been creating false documents, terrible lies, trying to smear my name and steal what her father plainly wanted me to have. We must all pray for her. Pray that she finds peace and accepts her father's will." She called me the forger. The sheer, magnificent audacity of it almost made me laugh. She was accusing me, publicly, of the very crime she had committed. She thought she was delivering the killing blow. She thought I would stand up and scream, cry, or protest, thus proving her point that I was unstable. I did none of those things. I waited until she had finished her performance, until the room was thick with misplaced sympathy for her. Then, I stood up. The room gasped. Carol's eyes widened, a flicker of panic in them. "Clara, dear," she said quickly. "Please don't make a scene. We know you're hurting." I ignored her. I walked directly to the front of the room, toward Pastor Miller, a kind, solemn man in his 70s who had baptized me. "Excuse me, Pastor," I said, my voice clear and calm. He looked at me, his face etched with concern. "Clara, this isn't the time. Actually, Pastor," I said, "it's the perfect time." I reached into my purse. While Carol was painting me as a forger, I was calmly holding the one document she couldn't dismiss my father's own words. I held up a thick, sealed envelope, its front bearing my father's weak but distinct handwriting. My father knew this day might come, I said, my voice projecting across the silent hall. He knew his sister. He wrote this letter 2 months ago and entrusted it to me. He asked me to read it to this congregation, his true friends. In the event of his death, Carol's face went white. This was not in her script. "That's a lie," she shrieked, her mask of piety dissolving into raw fury. "She forged that, too, Pastor. I don't read it." But it was too late. I hadn't handed it to a lawyer I didn't know. I handed it to Pastor Miller, a man who had known my father's signature for 40 years. He looked from the envelope to Carol's panicked face. He knew. He opened the seal. He began to read. The letter was my father's voice, plain and clear. He thanked the congregation for their years of friendship, and then he wrote, "In my final months, my only support, my rock, has been my daughter, Clara. She put her entire life on hold to care for me. A sacrifice I can never repay. My sister, Carol, on the other hand, has been circling, offering help that feels more like a threat. I am worried about what she will do when I am gone." The congregation gasped. "Mrs." Gable looked up at me, her hand flying to her mouth. The pastor continued reading. "I want my friends to know the truth. Clara is my sole heir. But more than that, she is the only one who truly loved me. She is the one who held my hand. She is the one who honored me." The room was turning, the weight of their judgment shifting from me to Carol, who looked as if she had been struck by lightning. The letter ended with one final, devastating instruction. And finally, I wish to donate my old family Bible, the one from my grandmother, to the church archive, as it holds our family's true history. The pastor finished, folded the letter, and looked directly at Carol. He didn't need to say a word. She was finished. She was exposed, publicly and permanently, as a liar and a monster, by the very community she had tried to manipulate. But I wasn't watching the congregation. I was watching Carol. I saw the moment the pastor said the word Bible. I saw the flash of pure, primal terror in her eyes. It wasn't just shame. It was calculation. The will was fake. Her reputation was shattered. And now, the junk she had thrown in the trash. The drafty old barn church. The sentimental old fools of the congregation, all the things she had dismissed had just converged to destroy her. But worse. Much worse. The letter had just given public, historical significance to the one object she knew I had rescued. She knew, in that instant, just as I had planned, exactly where my father would have hidden his real will. Her mind was racing. She had to get that Bible. She had to destroy it. And I knew exactly how to help her try. I left the church immediately. I didn't stay for the awkward apologies, the sudden, fawning concern from Mrs. Gable, or the shamefaced looks from the rest of the congregation. I clutched my purse, which now contained that sealed letter, and walked to my car, my footsteps echoing. I knew, with the certainty of a hunter, that I was being followed. I could feel Carol's desperate, hateful energy boring into my back. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. The part my lawyer had called insane, but that I knew was necessary. To win, I couldn't just prove her fraud. I had to catch her in an act of pure, undeniable malice. I had to let her arrogance be her own undoing. I drove to my father's house, the one she had tried to evict me from. I parked on the street, not in the driveway. I sat in the car for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I thought about the violation of what I was about to do. I was inviting this woman, this monster who had desecrated my father's final days, to break into my private space. I thought of all the years she had belittled me, all the sacrifices she had mocked, all the help she had offered that was just a cover for her theft. While I was sacrificing my career to hold my father's hand, she was plotting to steal his home. While I was honoring his memory, she was trying to destroy my reputation. And now, I would use her own sickness, her own greed, as the final piece of the trap. I opened my glove compartment and took out the family Bible, the junk she had thrown in the trash. I placed it, deliberately, on the passenger seat, clearly visible. Then I got out of the car, and, with a shaky hand, I forgot to lock the door. I went inside and waited, watching from the darkened living room window, my phone in my hand, already dialing my lawyer's number. I didn't have to wait long. Not 5 minutes later, Carol's black sedan pulled up 2 houses down. She got out, her movements jerky and panicked. She looked around, her head swiveling. The perfect picture of a common criminal. She thought she was being clever. She thought I was inside, grieving or praying like the sentimental fool B6 she had always called me. She believed, with every fiber of her arrogant being, that I was stupid, that I had left the key to her destruction sitting on my passenger seat out of sheer, idiotic sentimentality. She couldn't comprehend that I was smarter than her, that I had anticipated her every move, that I was not the victim, but the architect. She was a predictable, one-note creature, and her only notes were greed and rage. I watched her approach the car. She tried the handle. It opened. Her body sagged with relief. For a moment, she just stared at the Bible on the seat, her expression one of pure, venomous hatred. This book, this worthless, dusty, junk B6 book, this was the object that had cost her everything. This book had proven her a liar at the church. This book, she believed, held the holographic will that would send her to prison. While she was plotting her grand takeover of a multi-million-dollar estate, she had been brought down by an old book she wouldn't even touch for fear of dust. The irony was devastating. Her rage overcame her caution. She didn't just take the Bible. She snatched it. She pulled it from the car, clutching it to her chest like a prize, and sprinted back to her sedan. The moment her car door slammed, I hit send on my phone, sending a text to my lawyer and the police detective who were waiting just around the corner. She has it. Go. I had imagined this next part so many times. I had imagined Carol, driving to some secluded spot, a dark park or a lonely industrial road. I imagined her pulling the Bible out, her hands shaking with a terrible, triumphant glee. She was finally going to destroy the evidence. She was going to burn my father's history. She was going to erase the truth. I imagined her fumbling with a lighter, ready to set the whole thing ablaze. But she would, of course, open it first. She would have to. She would need to rip out the will, to watch the specific pages burn. And that's when she would see it. That's when her triumph would turn to ice. Because there was no will. There was nothing but a single blank 3, small, antique brass key, taped to the inside cover of the Book of Genesis. And beneath it, in my own neat, clear handwriting, a simple note, safe deposit box, First National Bank, number 348. That was the moment the flashing lights would appear in her rearview mirror, red and blue, bathing her in the colors of her own capture. That was when her world would end. She had been trapped. The Bible wasn't the treasure. It was the bait. The car wasn't a mistake. It was a snare. And I wasn't a grieving daughter. I was a trapdoor spider. She had just been caught, red-handed, by the police, having committed felony breaking and entering into a vehicle and theft of property, all to steal an object that I had intentionally left for her. And in doing so, in her desperate, idiotic panic, she had confirmed for the police and my lawyer that she knew the Bible was the key to the entire case. She had just confessed, without saying a word. My lawyer called me. We have her. Clara. She's in handcuffs. She looks surprised. I heard the faint sound of Carol shrieking in the background. A wild, animal sound of pure, narcissistic rage. She's holding the Bible right now. The detective is bagging it as evidence. We've informed her that she is being arrested for theft and that we are now proceeding with her to the First National Bank, as the key she just stole is evidence in an ongoing probate fraud investigation. She hadn't just lost. She had, with her own 2 hands, led us directly to the final vault. The game was over. All that was left was to read the score. The bank vault was cold and silent, the air heavy with the smell of old paper and polished metal. It was the perfect, sterile stage for the final act. Carol was there, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers, her wrists bound behind her back in steel handcuffs. The cheap metal looked garish against her expensive silk blouse. Melavier, Mr. Evans, stood beside me, his face a mask of calm professionalism. The bank manager, a woman named Miss Davis, looked pale and terrified, as if she were a hostage rather than a witness. Carol was radiating pure, undiluted hatred, her eyes fixed on me, narrowed to slits. Even now, even in handcuffs, she felt no remorse. She felt only rage that she had been caught. She still believed, I could see it, that I was the simple one, that I had somehow tricked her. I thought of all the years she had patted my hand, dismissing my life, my career, my intelligence. Clara, dear, you're a wonderful teacher. But this is the real world. You're just not built for it. While she was dismissing my intelligence, I was quietly building my case. While she was performing piety, I was documenting her crimes. She saw me as a lamb. She never realized I was a wolf. Ms. Davis, my lawyer said, his voice echoing slightly off the steel. This is Detective Miller. As you were informed, his officers just apprehended Ms. People, Carol Wilson, committing felony theft. He gestured to the evidence bag. The detective was holding the bag that contained my family Bible and the small brass key. The key she stole opened safe deposit box 348, registered to the deceased, Arthur Hayes, and his daughter, my client, Clara Hayes. We are here to open that box. Ms. Davis nodded, her hands trembling as she took her own key. She and the detective walked to the wall of gleaming metal boxes. As Ms. Davis inserted her key, my lawyer moved forward with the evidence key, and that was when Carol broke. It was not a plea. It was a table flip. It was a desperate, animalistic lunge, a shock of pure, violent rage that made the officers stumble. No, she shrieked, air voice cracking, the sound of a predator caught in a snare. It's a plant, she planted it. That's not his, she's a liar, a forger. She thrashed against the officers holding her, her face turning a deep, mottled purple. You can't open that, it's entrapment. She tricked me, she's obsessed, she's crazy. This was her last move. If logic failed, if force failed, if reputation failed, her only remaining weapon was chaos. She was trying to create so much noise, so much doubt, that the truth would become subjective. He said. She said. Mess that would tangle in the courts for years. She was banking on the idea that no one would believe a simple teacher could orchestrate such a perfect trap. Entrapment. The word was almost funny. She was accusing me of forcing her to commit a crime. I thought of the night my father died, her prayer group alibi while she was clinking glasses with her lawyer. I thought of her fake will, dated while he was in a medically induced coma. I thought of her arriving at my house with movers, a smug smile on her face, ready to throw me onto the street. She hadn't been tricked. She had been revealed. She had walked into a trap that her own greed had built, brick by brick. For 40 years, she had spent a lifetime setting snares for me, underestimating me at every turn. She just never imagined I would learn how to build a better one. She was still screaming. She's grieving. She's mentally unstable, I told you. She'll do anything for the money that was always her weapon. My love for my father. My pain. My sacrifice. She had always seen these things as weaknesses to be exploited. Clara, you're too emotional to handle this. Clara, let the adults manage the estate. While I was spending my nights holding my father's hand, wiping his brow, she was using my devotion as proof of my incompetence. She believed that love made you stupid. She believed grief made you weak. She was about to learn that grief, when forged in the fire of betrayal, hardens into steel. The head detective, a calm, tired-looking man who had seen everything, didn't even look at her. He just nodded to Ms. Davis. Open the box. Ms. Davis and my lawyer turned their keys. There was a heavy click. The metal door swung open. The bank manager, her hands shaking, slid out the metal container and placed it on the table. Carol stopped screaming. The silence was sudden, deafening. She just stared at the box, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. Milaver, wearing gloves, lifted the lid. It was not full. There were only 2 items inside. The first was a long, yellow legal envelope. My lawyer slid it out. He read the front aloud. Holographic will of Arthur Hayes. The second was a small, white, personal envelope. On the front, in my father's weak, shaky handwriting, was one word: Carol. Carol made a small, choking sound, like an animal being strangled. The holographic will. My lawyer began, pulling out the 3 pages of handwritten text. Is dated October 16th, the day after he came out of the coma, the day after Carol's fraudulent document was supposedly signed. It is written entirely in Mr. Hayes's hand. My lawyer continued, his voice clear and final. It revokes all prior wills and testaments, and it names Clara Hayes as the sole and total beneficiary of the entire estate. It appears to be witnessed by... He smiled. A small, grim smile of pure satisfaction. Dr. Alicia Menon, his neurosurgeon, and Mr. David Kenner, his hospice nurse. It was perfect, ironclad, a will born not of greed, but of clarity. And then, my lawyer said, his voice softening, there is this. He picked up the small white envelope. He opened it. It was a letter. He read it aloud for the officers. For the bank manager. For here, Carol. He read. And the voice was my father's. I am writing this from the hospital. My hand is shaking. But my mind is clear. Clara just left to get me some water. She hasn't slept in 3 days. She is an angel. I felt the tears finally come. Not for sadness, but for him, for his strength. I know you. The letter continued. I know your greed. I am writing this because I know exactly what you tried to do yesterday. While I was unconscious, you tried to make me sign papers. You thought I was gone. You thought I was stupid. You thought I didn't see the notary you had waiting in the hall while you whispered to your lawyer. I have known you my entire life. And you have only ever been a vulture. You circle, waiting for death, smelling weakness. You mistake my daughter's kindness for weakness. You are wrong. She is the strongest person I have ever known. You will get nothing. You were never family. You were only a burden. This is my last word to you. My lawyer finished reading. The vault was absolutely silent. Carol was not screaming. She was not crying. She was just broken. She was hollowed out. She hadn't just been disinherited. She hadn't just been arrested. She had been seen. The brother she thought was a fool had seen her. The niece she thought was simple had destroyed her. The detective, no longer gentle, pulled her upright. "Carol Wilson," he said, his voice flat. "You are under arrest for felony will forgery, probate fraud, breaking and entering, and theft. You have the right to remain silent." She didn't resist. She just stared at the letter. A ghost in her own failed story. I calmly stepped forward. My lawyer handed me the holographic will and my father's letter. I looked at the family Bible, still in its evidence bag. "I'd like my property back." "Detective," I said. He nodded. I took the Bible. I held it to my chest. Its worn leather familiar against my heart. I turned around and walked out of the bank, leaving Carol to the cold, sterile justice of the vault. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were smarter than you? Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours against someone who thought your kindness was a weakness? I learned that day that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about being the most prepared. It's about knowing that while others are focused on junk, the real value is in the truth, in the history, and in the details. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to find your own strength in the face of betrayal, drop a comment below. And please, like and subscribe. You never know when you'll need to remember that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards.